Taking the family outside for some fresh air seemed like a wonderful idea, according to my dad. Except for the Adidarat's conclusion, nothing significant occurs where I reside in a tiny town. I will simply jump to the part about the Las Vegas event. Both then and now, I am 17 years old. So it was always interesting and fun to see a new huge city. We were supposed to stay at the Mirage, a posh hotel and casino. We were staying in a hotel, so I decided to kill time by peering out the window at this artificial volcano. I told my dad I was going to this water show or something when I made the decision to go for a solo stroll. As I was strolling along the strip, I passed Caesar's Palace and noticed that there was a pathway that most people didn't use. It was just a haphazard path that most people wouldn't choose. This may not sound very plausible, but I was approached by a stranger who asked if I had any money to lend. He was wearing cargo pants, a Jimi Hendrix t-shirt, a cap, and he was a little darker than myself. I gave a polite and kind response. He gave his approval, and we parted ways. I spent a few minutes exploring the area and looking around when I saw the same guy cautiously following me inside a pharmacy where I purchased a Rockstar and some sort of candy bar. I decided to head back to my hotel as soon as possible after spotting the same guy again, albeit from a farther distance. I took a look around after passing this water show, which appears around every 15 minutes. I continued walking toward the Mirage, which is now in sight, not realizing that he was there. I hear, "Hey man," coming from behind me as I make my way to the front doors of the Mirage. I just kept going because I assumed it was to someone else because there were so many people around. I hear the same voice saying, "Yo dude," after taking a little stroll among the strange shops. Turning around, I see the man who had earlier requested money from me. I didn't know him at all, so I pushed aside the guilt I felt from lying to him. He was getting closer, and I thought, fuck, too late to book it, so I decided to go with the extremely uncomfortable chat. He asked me again if I had any money to lend after we had a rather pleasant conversation. I assumed that he had seen me buy my drink and candy bar, so that's pretty much how I felt. I didn't ask queries like, "Can I have some money?" and "Got any change?" And I said, "My dad's calling," as soon as I could. I finally found out the guy's name after I hung up with my dad. Jerry. He paused for a solid 5 seconds, which is how I knew it wasn't his true name. After shaking his hand, I hurried to the elevator since I could hear him jogging after me. I noticed some women moving in a cluster, akin to the formation of fighter aircraft, with the lead pilot in the center and others moving slowly to either side. Using my passable agility, I managed to get past them without drawing any ire. He began to chase after me after I managed to get away from him, but I made it to the elevator in time, went to my room, and went to bed to recover. I traveled to Port Elizabeth to see relatives with my mother and younger brother. We were eager to play in the ocean rather than spend time indoors because we were the only children there. My mom selected a bright day, we packed our boogie boards, and my grandma accompanied us to the closest beach. My sibling and I sprinted in the direction of a flight of steps that led to the shore. I gave up. I was the focus of attention. I felt it. In South Africa, you learn to be watchful as you grow up. Take note of your surroundings. Pay particular attention to people. I scanned the throng, attempting to figure out what was triggering my alarm. Then I discovered it. 2 men in their late 20s to early 30s who were about 20 meters ahead of me. With wide toothy smiles on their faces, they were motionless and gazing at me. I gave them a smile and a nod in reply, letting them know that I was aware of them. Be kind, not gullible. Act civil, but distrustful. Looking at them, I was uneasy. They were being surrounded by the crowd. They did not exchange words, and they appeared to move only when I turned my head. Though startled, all I did was mentally remind myself to watch them as I descended the stairs and dove into the luscious sand. Before we started swimming, my brother and I waited for the parents to choose a location. A little while passed. The men from before waded into the water a good distance away from us, and I felt a little ridiculous for being concerned about them even though I shouldn't have been. But I was unable to get rid of my unease. I left and rested next to my mother. Although I couldn't see the males, I still felt like they were watching me. After a few minutes, I returned to the water, writing it off to paranoia. I chose to use my brother as a reference to find my position in the water while I rode the waves out because he had exited the water and was beginning to dig his amazing sand trench. I performed this several times. Goosebumps suddenly rose up my back. I turned to see the same men standing a few meters away from me, gesturing and waving at me. Until then, I had been enjoying myself and hadn't noticed them coming. I saw them smiling again, and adrenaline kicked in. Their broad smiles seemed out of place, fake, and empty-eyed. They invited me to come closer, and I shook my head and smiled back uncomfortably. But I'm sure my face was plastered with fear. They moved to approach me, as though to validate my suspicions about their motives. Nobody was near enough to hear me yell, and I knew I wouldn't be strong enough in the water to flee, fight, or swim. I was pulling deeper into the sea when I felt the water abruptly grab hold of me. There was a huge wave approaching. After setting up my boogie board, I began to paddle. Now I was past the creeps and deeper into the ocean. They were only a few meters away when the wave struck. I went straight by them. For a brief moment, I was relieved, but then I felt a hand grab my ankle and pull violently. My throat tightened around my heart. Out of instinct, I kicked. Luckily, I was slippery from being covered in sunscreen and was able to extricate myself right away. I was swept to the shore by the surf. Despite having a mouthful of seawater in my cough, I quickly got up and hurried to get my brother. He jumped at the chance to race me back to his mother when I told him I would. From where the sea had just thrown me, I cast a quick glance back. The ogres remained where they had been, grinning and waving. Up to the point when we packed up and left for home, I stayed by my mom's side. I peered over my shoulder as we made our way to the car. They were there. 2 adult men turned around and vanished into the crowd after they had tried to seize a youngster and were just standing there watching, grinning, and waving at it like nothing strange had happened. This narrative takes place in the early 2000s. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, my family and I went on vacation to the Caribbean. Like many other islands in the Caribbean, this one was mostly underdeveloped. Naturally, the resort areas that drew in a large number of visitors were stunning examples of paradise. When you're a young child visiting an upscale holiday destination, you don't really consider the fact that you're in a foreign nation that you don't fully understand. You have no idea what goes on beyond the guarded resort, and you definitely have no idea that many Caribbean islands, despite their beautiful beaches, are also major sites for drug smuggling, human trafficking, and other illicit activities. It wasn't until years later, in high school, that the complete ludicrousness of what I'm about to recount dawned on me. Natalie Holloway and Amy Bradley had both disappeared during vacations in the Caribbean in the late 1990s and early 2000s. My family and I went on one of those sunset boat cruises one evening after checking out of the resort. We boarded a shuttle with another family and traveled to a marina around 30 minutes away from the resort. I recall being increasingly aware of how impoverished some of the island's less visited regions were during our ride to the port. Numerous villagers were residing in small, dilapidated shelters constructed from salvaged metal, as I observed. And in contrast to the verdant gardens that were regularly irrigated inside the resort's walls, the surrounding area was essentially a desolate desert. Nevertheless, we took the boat tour when the shuttle dropped us all off at the docks. It was a fantastic experience. The crew of the boat informed us about the history of the islands and pointed out rare species. It was probably approximately 11 p.m. by the time we made it back to the docks, and at the age of 10, I was completely worn out. After getting off the boat, I strolled back along the dock to the parking area where the shuttle had previously left us off. I was pretty tired by the time my parents and the other adults we were with got off the boat because they didn't really appear to be paying attention to me. most likely a good 200 feet in front of them. Although the marina was well lit, I could have easily mistaken for a cave when I turned the bend to reach the parking lot because there wasn't much light there. I narrowed my eyes, trying to see if the van we'd come in was parked somewhere nearby, but a few seconds later, a very strong hand gripped my shoulder. "With whom did you come here?" The voice was accusing and reprimanding, and I freaked out right away, thinking I was in trouble. "You were driven here by someone?" The man interrupted me as I was trying to explain that I was with my family and that we were waiting for our driver. "Come to my automobile, you came here with me." At this time, the guy started dragging me deeper into the dim parking lot in the direction of a car I had never seen before. At this point, I wouldn't even say that I was panicked. Despite my deep confusion and my instinct that something was clearly wrong, I chose not to listen to the person because I didn't want to face consequences for not listening to grown-ups. But as he kept dragging me toward his car, I became aware that it was far too small to accommodate the group of people I had come with. At this point, I really began to resist the man and attempt to free myself from his hold. Just as I was about to yell and get angry, the parking area was suddenly illuminated by floodlights. As soon as my dad and the others in our party turned the corner, the guy released his grip on my arm. All I can recall when I glanced up at him was how menacing he appeared. His face was covered in scars, and he was bald. Most likely, he was in his late 40s. His eyes were big and his look was one of dumbfoundedness, clearly not realizing that a whole group of people was only 30 seconds behind me. A man working at the pier yelled out to him, but he kind of threw up his arms, shrugged, and left without more ado. My dad asked me something like, "What did that guy want from you?" on the way back to the resort. "I guess he thought I rode in on his shuttle and that I was lost or something," I said in my childlike naivete. And from the looks of things, this explanation made perfect sense, because we never really talked about it again.